Good evening, and thank you very much for having me. When we first started, Tim thanked the wonderful folks in the business community here, the great people who run this theater. I think we need to take a moment to remember that a festival like this, if it goes well, is sort of like a nice dinner party. You walk in, everything's set, interesting people, good dinner, everything just show and you leave. The fact is, it takes an awful lot of hard work to put these things together, and let's take a moment to acknowledge the tremendous hard work and continuing work of the people who work for McMinimans who have made this possible for us. As Tim said, the topic of my talk tonight is the so-called Rendlesham Forest Incident, alternately known as the Bentwaters Incident or the Bentwaters Woodbridge Incident. To say that this is an important case is an understatement. Outside of this country, it is seen as one of the very most significant incidents in the history of UFO study. I think here, a little bit less so because it didn't happen here. We're kind of funny like that. The fact of the matter, though, is it involves citizens of this country in a very profound way. The incident occurred in and around two of the most highly secured NATO facilities in the United Kingdom, RAF Woodbridge, RAF Bentwaters, both in Suffolk, East Anglia, a very rural, very beautiful area, about 70 miles northeast of London. In late December of 1980, a series of events occurred over 3 nights in Suffolk between Christmas and New Year's that were so profound in their implications that had the real nature of what had occurred in those forests, that field, in and around those 2 bases ever been made public, it would have changed profoundly the relationship that then existed between the United States and Great Britain, as well as the way we see ourselves in the universe. Obviously, that didn't happen, which is pretty much always the case. But it did change the way that people in Great Britain, in Europe, and beyond see the UFO story and the level of seriousness that it is now taken with in Great Britain. A little bit of the backstory first. As Tim had said, I began my research when I was 3 years old. I'm 28 now. Thank you. And after 10 or 11 years, I was seriously looking for a project that I could sink my teeth into for a book. I was aspiring as a writer. I'd had some articles published. I had a lot of dreams of making a mark in this field, as some of you may have. And in 1987, the summer of 1987, the 40th anniversary of the incidents that kicked this off, I attended a conference in Washington, D.C., sponsored by MUFON, where I was a panelist on a discussion about the abduction phenomena, basically rooted in my work with Bud Hopkins and some of his colleagues. And there was a speaker there who interested me tremendously. His name was Larry Warren. And I knew who he was because he had become a kind of public figure in the field in 1983, at first under a pseudonym and then under his own name shortly after, as somebody who alleged that he was not just an eyewitness to the most astounding part of these 3 days and 3 nights of events, but that he was the whistleblower, who was the individual who had gotten this information public. And it's funny, I remember sitting in that hall in American University, listening him talk, saying to myself, either this guy is one of the most courageous people I've ever met, or he's one of the most reckless and naive people I have ever met. Larry's not naive, but he is headstrong, he is heroic, and he took some risks that one person in 1,000 would. When we say the term whistleblower, some of us think of somebody like Karen Silkwood, who, in trying to expose the tremendous abuses in Kerr-McGee, the corporation that was basically radioactively poisoning a number of its employees, and Karen died in a quote-unquote mysterious car accident on her way to an interview with a New York Times reporter, we usually think of that level of the game. Whistleblowers are not like us, and I say it after studying them as a kind of particular character type. They actually believe that the world should work properly, that people should keep their word, that people should be treated with respect, and that institutions should safeguard the rights of the individuals that serve them. Larry was a young volunteer at the time, a 19-year-old in the United States Air Force stationed in England, with specialty training in anti-terrorist activity, as well as working around nuclear ordnance. Now, by the time he had finished speaking, I knew I wanted to speak to this guy privately, whether or not this was the root of a book or that it would be a heck of an interview. We chatted the next day in the hall, and I was taken aback at how quickly he agreed to the interview. In fact, he was at my apartment in Manhattan the very next weekend, and that recorder ran for about 5 or 6 hours. He let me ask him any questions I wanted, gave me permission to use any of the material that he had put on that tape without any kind of payment, and put some things on the record that he had not talked about in the public forum the week before. By Sunday evening, I was a little wary. Why had he laid all this information out for me? And he said, frankly, I heard you on that panel discussion, and I know you're not terribly well known in the field. I know you've never written a book, but I think you're the guy that I want to write a book with. My terms are these. As long as I get to say what happened to me, what I saw, what happened to me as a result of what I saw, and discuss some of the other incidents I've had in my life that are non-standard, to put it mildly, you are not only free to pursue any research you wish to support my claims, you are free to disprove me. I am going to turn over every bit of paperwork I have, whether it's my high school report card, all my military records that I possess, most of which I do not possess and which are now classified. Here is the phone number of my mother. My life is an open book to you. It did not strike me as the claim of somebody who was lying or exaggerating their involvement in an incident to go on the record like that. It would have been a pretty schizophrenic book if I had proved him to not be telling the truth, and he's spending half the book saying that this happened to me, and I'm spending the other half of the book saying this didn't happen to him, and here's why. But I did, and I have to tell you here, I had no idea of what I was getting into. None at all. In my mind, I thought, well, here's something we can devote a year, maybe a year and a half or two to. We should probably go back to England. That'd be a good idea, make us look more serious as researchers as well. And we'll get the book published. It'll be a bestseller. We'll sell it for a movie. George Clooney will play me, and I'll be famous and have millions of girlfriends, and life will go on. Well, life doesn't always work out as it does in our dreams. What was going to be a year to 2 years, one trip to England and a couple of $1,000s, became 9 years. Between the two of us, 15 trips to England at our own expense, bankruptcy for both of us, and ultimately a bestseller that changed the way that people think about this subject all over the United Kingdom. And for that, I am eternally proud. We're going to look at some slides, and if we have a chance, we're going to look at some video footage. The book itself looks like this. It's a big fat 500-page book. If you have a pet cat, do not drop this on the cat. It will hurt it very badly. It reads in some places like fiction, but I have to tell you, my name and reputation is attached to it. Everything is fully documented, and most of the things in several respects. It opens and closes like a legal brief because you are the judge and jury on this incident. Many people have already passed on it as a case that would, if such things were brought to court of law, be the case that could crack this wide open. Let's face it, the seminal UFO incident case legend in the world is Roswell. I don't think there's a case more important. However, we're dealing with an incident that is more than 50 years past, and as Stan Friedman says, we're kind of racing the undertaker here. Most of the individuals involved, directly or indirectly, have already passed on or certainly advancing age. These events I'm going to describe to you took place in 1980. Literally all of the principals are involved. If, and it won't happen under this administration, we were to have another and properly conducted congressional investigation of the UFO question, many of the witnesses who are named in this book could be subpoenaed and would testify. Also, Tim had mentioned when he first brought me up here that I'm here courtesy of the Sci-Fi Channel. What does Sci-Fi have to do with UFO reality? The Sci-Fi Channel is a media company. Their sister companies is the USA Network and Universal Studios, and they are going through a bit of a change right now. Somewhere along the line, they decided that maybe they should do some programming for that funny bit, the group of subjects that sci-fi is based on, because the fi is often rooted in reality. And I'm proud to say that as of 6 weeks ago, the network was given the go-ahead to produce a feature-length 2-hour documentary on the Rendlesham Forest Incident that will be aired this October. And partly as a result of that, they were kind enough to sponsor me to be here with you in truly one of my favorite states in the Union. And I'm very happy to be back in Oregon. So, to the slides, Randy. How about one of mine? Sorry. Yeah. Okay. I've had, pardon? Yes, if you would. Let's dim the front lights. Okay, Larry Warren is a guy who was born in New York City. A very fine family as far as I'm concerned. I've met many of his relatives. His mom is one of my favorite people in the world. Catholic background, raised with the right values, joined the service for the right reasons and because there was a chance to go to England where he had done a year in his high school schooling. He loved England. He's also a big Beatle fan and knew that he could get cheaper tickets to the Who by being stationed in England than in the States. At the time, you could actually still request your country of posting. He was, I think, the very last individual before they changed the policy. And this is a picture of Larry in Texas in basic training in the summer of 1980. Next, please, Randy. Okay, to set the location, this is a pretty much a basic grid map of England. You've got the top of Scotland, we'll cut off there, but we don't really need it. Okay. That big blue dot gives you an idea of the area where this happened, and that covers Suffolk, East Anglia. Reminds me, though, that when we first did this talk after this book came out, our first venue was Gulf Breeze, Florida, and it was very exciting to actually do a talk with a book for the first time. And after it was over, a very nice gentleman came over to Larry and asked, very respectfully, Mr. Warren, that big blue dot there on the map that you showed? He said, yeah. He said, the UFO was that big? It was not that big. Next, please. Okay, closing in on a bit, you see the twin base complexes of RAF Woodbridge, RAF Bentwaters, about 6 miles in from the English Channel right here. And again, we're about 70 miles northeast of London, as this map indicates. Next, please. And yet another one. This really brings us into where the action is. At the very top here, you see RAF Bentwaters with its main runway, its classified runways. We actually saw an SR-71 at Blackbird that you guys now have to keep the Spruce Goose Company. When they were still classified at high performance conditions, it was the most remarkable terrestrial thing I have ever seen in the air, and was probably over the coast of New York about 40 minutes later. Now, the area that's penciled in green here is the Rendlesham Forest. One thinks of England, one thinks of history, mythology, all kinds of wonderful, mysterious stuff, fabulous forests filled with who knows what. This is not one of those romantic old 8th century forests. This is a forest that's about 100 years old that was created purely for logging purposes, but is a good thick forest and actually separates the twin bases by about 5 miles. Now, RAF Woodbridge here has the longest runway in all of Europe or the United Kingdom. And both bases are now decommissioned. although RAF Woodbridge still has a minor function, as I recall, in air-sea rescue and in emergency recovery for our space program. At the time of these incidences, these were two of the most highly secured and well-manned bases in the entire NATO establishment. And in late December 1980, the incidents that created the stir were set against a rather dramatic backdrop. Number one, if you were to go back to your newspapers of December 1980, toward the end of the month, the biggest international story involved a renegade Polish shipyard electrician working in the Gdansk shipyards in Poland and organizing an increasingly successful pro-democracy movement in a hardcore communist country, and that was Mr. Lech Walesa, who went on to become the first president of Poland. Now, what we were not aware of in the United States, because our newspapers did not tell us this, and probably for the right reasons, was that something like 120,000 crack Soviet tank and infantry troops were massed along the Polish border and ready to roll into Poland. If they did, World War III would have begun. Every single NATO base in Europe, every single NATO base in the United Kingdom was on a full red alert. Red is one step below black, and black is war. The other tiny complication is that at this time, it was transition in terms of American leadership. Ronald Reagan had been elected president the month before. Carter was still president, but we were right in that sort of lame duck period. Now, according to our treaties with Great Britain, nuclear ordnance was permitted for the Americans to bring in 1982 under an agreement between Ronald Reagan and Dame Margaret Thatcher, the then Prime Minister. Up until then, it was not permitted. However, in violation of our treaty with the United Kingdom, we have established that at the time of the UFO events, something like 350,000 kilotons of tactical nuclear devices were stored in underground bunkers, hardened bunkers, made of alternating layers of concrete, steel, and earth. A 1 kiloton nuclear device has a kill zone of 10 miles. If you were to put a compass point down on a map and spin it 10 miles, the first mile of that circle, the bullseye of the target, would be glass. And the next 10 miles, there would be no living thing. So, when the British government came forward after the so-called Rendlesham Forest Incidents to a spokesperson for the Ministry of Defense and said, "We are not sure. We do not know what happened in those woods over that course of those 3 nights around the elite bases that we leased to the Americans. However, we are comfortable with the fact that these were of no defense significance." It's a tremendous untruth. Even if this were some kind of conventional intervention over secured airspace where nuclear devices were stored, when you're dealing with 350,000 kilotons of nuclear devices, this is indeed of defense significance. So, we're talking about 3 nights of activities, the first 2 nights of which my co-author, Larry Warren, was on leave. He was in London with friends. And when he returned that 3rd morning, it was not like this was being whispered from guy to guy that they were making flying saucer jokes or that it was a rumor sweeping the base. He didn't know anything about it, and that included when he went on guard mount, where these men who are posted around our military bases are checked out to make sure that they are in proper form and have not ingested even any cold medication or even had a beer 24 hours before they are posted online on a base perimeter with a loaded M16 or other ordnance. Well, again, this is Forest, here's RAF Woodbridge, here's RAF Bentwaters. The main incident on the 3rd night, the one that Larry was involved in, and we'll get back to that shortly, occurred right about here on this red dot in a farmer's field that I know like backyard I grew up in now, called Capel Green. Very pastoral, very pretty. By the way, all of the forest is considered Forestry Service land and open to the public. Many people walk their dogs there. It's not uncommon now to walk into the forest and see people who are there as tourists because of the Bentwaters incident, the Rendlesham Forest Incident. Next slide, please. Right. This is one of the legendary warning signs to not cross a perimeter in Ministry of Defense held facilities. And I took it with a great deal of respect right up until the moment that I slipped under one and wondered if we were in an area with a lot of landmines. It's funny the stuff you do when you get obsessed with the subject. The base at this point had been decommissioned, although it was still heavily guarded. And we were caught and thrown off the base more than once. You know, at a certain point, you just become extremely committed to projects, and you're not thinking about your safety the way you normally would. Next slide, please. Okay, had you visited the base in 1988, this would have been the sign that welcomed you to the base. We've got the NATO symbol there. It was Donald F. Klein, who was colonel and commander. The 81st TAC Fighter Wing, this was their home. They have since been disbanded, and their units and materials dispersed to other military bases around the world. Next, please. This photograph, had I taken it a few short years earlier, I'd probably be getting out of a British security prison right about now. It was taken with an extreme telephoto lens, and it is a hardened bunker in which some of this nuclear ordnance was stored. Next, please. This is also part of the U.S.A.F, that is Nuclear Weapons Storage Area. And on the first night of events, which would have been the night of, I guess, the 26th, 27th, UFOs came in over this weapons storage area and hovered and moved off. Now imagine if a Piper Cub off course or a civilian helicopter came in over a military nuclear weapons storage area and refused to, or was unable to, or chose not to identify itself when questioned. It would be vaporized. They would shoot first and do paperwork later and get sponges and pick up what was left of human beings. We do not know for a fact whether or not these unknowns were fired upon, but they moved over the area with impunity, multiply witnessed. Next, please. One more view of the weapons storage area. Okay, Larry, it's funny the way things work out in life. He had just gotten a small Kodak Instamatic when he was on leave on those 2 days before. And one of the first pictures was the entryway gatehouse to the main entrance to the base. And you will see here quite clearly, there is a sign that says alert condition. That has nothing to do with UFOs, although it is ironic. It has to do with the full red alert and the fact that literally every single fighter aircraft, including all the A-10 tank busters, which most of us first heard about, the first Gulf War incursion, and also served more recently in the Iraqi conflict, all of their aircraft were already at forward operating locations in West Germany, ready to move if war became imminent. Next, please. Right. This is the very extreme end of the major runway at RAF Bentwaters. And by the way, these fences have now, these fences were fairly new in 1988 at the time. They were like a little bitty cyclone fence that you could have almost jumped over. Security has changed quite a bit. And again, this is way pre-9/11, but American bases licensed from the British were still targets for IRA terrorists. And on this particular night, with the alert condition, every single guard post was manned, which is non-standard. Larry was posted to perimeter post 18, which is actually this little rise here, which is an old World War II pillbox. If you've ever had the pleasure of traveling in Great Britain along its eastern coast, There are thousands of these old little structures that were 1- and 2-man defense units that were built in the very dark days of 1940, anticipating an invasion from the Germans. And Larry had been posted. He has a Motorola radio. He has an M16. And he's beginning to hear some chatter over the radio of guys saying, you know, there's one overhead. UFOs were indeed being seen down the line. He could not see any from where he was, but the chatter was shut up very quickly by a more senior personnel who came on the radio and told the guys to knock it off. Shortly after, he was informed that a base vehicle would be along to pick him up and that he should close down his perimeter post. There was another assignment. Next slide, please. About 20 minutes later, this pickup truck, military version, or one exactly like it, driven by a lieutenant, well, I think it was Lieutenant Bruce England was either driving or in it. Also in it was Sergeant Adrian Bastinza, a key player in this story as well, and happened to be the gentleman standing right next to Larry Warren in that field a short time later when they had the experience of their lives. The vehicles were brought to the base motor pool where trailer hitches, they were hooked up to their trailer hitches. Many of the vehicles were then hooked up to light-alls, which are essentially the civilian equivalent of those big Hollywood fleet lights we associate with movie premieres. These ones are gasoline operated, all of them were topped off. The vehicles were then moved to the entranceway to the base, and sometime after midnight, they rolled out into the British countryside. Now, it was a night again in December. There was no moon, it was temperate, and once they were off base, there was very little ambient light. This is pretty extreme countryside, not unlike areas not far from where we are here. Next slide, please. That is the now decommissioned main entrance to RAF Bentwaters, where the vehicles came out of. Now, although you can't compare this to the type of treaty violation of having all the nuclear ordnance there in violation of our treaty with Great Britain, as the men rolled through that entrance, another treaty violation occurred. They were now carrying live, loaded weapons with high-power ammunition on English soil as opposed to their base. That is not okay. Next slide. This is the guard post for RAF Woodbridge, the sister base. And it's at the end of a road that runs about half a mile called East Gate Road, because this is the gate. Now, the name of our book, Left at East Gate, is kind of a conjunction of the fact that as the men, when they were coming toward the sister base, there was an MP in the road who stopped them. Right in front of them was a small white Ford Cortina, which is a Ford that is actually manufactured in the car, was a young mother and a sleeping child. The men were close enough in their pickup truck to hear the woman ask what the problem was, and the MP told her there is unexploded ordnance ahead, we're removing it. Now, to be told that there's unexploded ordnance, i.e. an unexploded bomb, in the road somewhere ahead, normally is kind of a stretch. It's a little bit hard to believe. But study your history and go back to the Battle of Britain, which raged for weeks over Suffolk, dogfights between the great RAF fighters and the very formidable German fighters, and they are still pulling unexploded ordnance out of those woods 60 years later. So this is not a joke in this area. After a little while, the car moved on. They pulled up to the MP, asked where they should be going, and what he told them was, in so many words, a left after Eastgate Road onto a logging road. And that's just what they did. And they headed up that logging road. Next, please. Okay, this is that logging road. And they went about half a mile down, a couple of hundred yards down, where there's a rough-hewn circle. And this is a road that indeed is created for logging. Vehicles move in and out primarily to remove timber. It's also a very popular place for dog walking and bird watching. Next slide, please. Okay, at about this point where you see the broken tree, there is a widening, a circular widening right here. And this is where the vehicles pulled in, stopped, cut their engines, and the men disembarked. Almost immediately, or as part of this caravan of vehicles, was a similar truck to a regular pickup truck with racks welded on the back. It was an armorer's truck, and the armorer collected the weaponry the men brought out there. The men, who were primarily American Air Force security police officers, highly trained individuals, dedicated to their work, most of them quite young, as is often the case in the military, were broken up into unarmed, three-man groups. Each group was given a Motorola radio. They were told to head that way into the woods toward what seemed to be a glow in the distance to investigate a disturbance. And into the twilight zone they walked. It is now well past midnight. They're trying to bring the light-alls out. Absolutely none of the light-alls will kick in. Motorola radios are fritzing out. Flashlights are working erratically. And as the men moved into the woods toward this glow, which was actually coming from the field beyond the woods, the static electricity charge in the air was so intense. Let's remember here that we've got a lot of 18 to 20-year-old guys with very thick, healthy head of hair. Don't even wish we still had that, guys. And this was a unit that wore berets, not helmets. The static electricity charge was so powerful, it was pushing the berets off the men's heads. Think about that for a moment. As they walked in, Larry heard a distinct sound of a man breaking down. And he and his team came upon another one of their team who was basically curled up with his back to a tree stump, crying, being calmed and comforted by another personnel. They moved on. Their light that they were seeing grew stronger, and at a certain point, the trees cleared and they could see the farmer's field ahead, which we know is called Capel Green. Next slide, please. Okay, this is an important picture for several reasons. I have been to this field now, I would have to say 100, 150 times over the last 15 years. But this was the first moment that I saw it as we cleared the rise, and this is the very first picture I took. Now, one of my methods of research was record everything and sort it out later. If I have sort of a guiding spirit in terms of the way that I do my work, it is the wonderful deductive reasoning that I was introduced to at 12 years old when I started to read Arthur Conan Doyle and became enamored with Sherlock Holmes. According to deductive reasoning, you start with the most mundane explanations for the mystery you're facing and examine them one at a time. And whatever you're left with, no matter how extraordinary, is probably fairly close to the truth of the matter. Now, at this moment, I have recorder in hand. We cross the rise. I'm very aware that Larry Warren has not been back to this field in 8 years and 3 months since the night of the incident. It wasn't even like he went back the next week to check it out. This was not a happy place for him. And as we come over this rise, and follow me here, I'm recording this, Larry's arm shoots out, literally reflexively, and he points over here. Can we get a little more focus on this? I don't know if we can, but maybe just a bit. And he says it sat right there. And then you're listening to this recording, which is one of the many transcriptions that is captured in the book. And he says something to the effect of, but of course, that's just a coincidence that that area where it sat all those years ago is darker and sort of oval-shaped, but definitely discolored from the rest of the field. Now, my first reaction was not, oh my God, look at that mark where a flying saucer sat. It was, yeah, right. What's the big deal? It could be a play of light. It could be a lightning strike from 4 years ago. It could be that the farmer who owned the field dumped a load of nitrite fertilizer on that spot and had not graded it out. I started with the most mundane, and we spent several hours on location. And over that time, it's an overcast afternoon, what a shock for England, just like here. We're looking, and you're squinting your eyes, you're walking along the edge of the field, and at a certain point, son of a gun, that is different. And I had a couple rolls of black and white film, although I went on to shoot many, many, many dozens of color rolls over the years. And I had, those little empty plastic film canisters, you get 35 millimeter film. And I hiked myself out 100 feet or so, into the center of this ellipse. And notice where it is in terms of this rise of trees, because that's going to be important in the next photo. And I go to about here, what for me is about dead center, and I scoop up some of the soil. Then I walk several hundred feet out into the field toward the farmer's cottage, and I scoop up some more soil. And I know I'm digressing here, I'm jumping back and forth between the incident. Our time is going to go very fast in any case, and I'm only going to be touching on this, so I want to make it as broad-based as possible. And when I did an analysis of the soil, a very informal one, there was no question about the fact that the soil looked different, felt different, reconstituted with water differently, and what was confirmed several years later through professional soil analysis was quite dramatic and quite shocking to me. But back to the night of the incident. They get out to this point. They see over to the left, the lights on the second floor of this farmer's cottage are on. They're up. They seem to be watching. Now, sitting on this spot is a ground fog. Well, if you've ever seen a kind of moody British movie from the 40s or something, you know that fog is a way of life in England. However, this ground fog was circular. It was self-illuminated and about a foot or two off the ground. It was literally like a giant aspirin tablet, very clearly defined, and the men were ordered to surround it in the same procedure that they would use to secure a nuclear device, a procedure called covered wagon. And they hold their ground. Now, after X amount of time, 20 minutes, half hour, I forget, they all begin to observe, and there are dozens of personnel out in this field now, dozens. And they begin to observe coming in from the direction of the North Sea, i.e. the English Channel, only about 6 miles away, a reddish glowing shape that's not moving much faster than a balloon in the wind, but is obviously under intelligent control and is not a balloon in the wind. And the object comes in closer and closer and closer. And it comes in literally directly above this spot, maybe 30 feet, 40 feet up. All eyes are on it, understandably, and without a sound, it explodes with such magnesium brightness that it was the equivalent of many, many flashlights, flashbulbs going off at once for the men. It was more than that, though. It actually burned the retinas of Larry Warren's eyes. We have the Air Force medical documentation in left that he escaped to back it up. It obviously did the same thing to other men. And left everybody blinded for a moment or two. We all know the feeling after having somebody take a snapshot of us and, within several seconds our eyes readjust. When their eyes readjusted, sitting in the ground fog, either floating in it or on some kind of, apparatus, was a machine of undetermined origin. There was nothing ethereal or gossamer-like or speculative about this. It was metal. They could actually see metal fittings. It had a very unusual refraction. I've heard it described as like mother of pearl. It kept shifting. It played games in a way with sort of colors. It was hard to look at it directly as opposed to try to see it with your peripheral vision. It also played what I can only call some very strange games with the shadows of the men who surrounded it. If they would move, and bear in mind here, you've probably got some men, no matter how highly trained, in some degree of physiological shock, as probably any of us we would be in a similar situation. Now, when a man moved, they would observe their shadow to move, but slightly after the fact. There was kind of a thickness in the air, and in fact, when this thing appeared, a number of the men ran off into the woods. Almost all of them held their ground, though, because they're highly trained, and they just did. Now, at this point, they are all in a full circle around this machine. And what is weirder than the shadows playing tricks on the surface of it is the fact that there's no lights behind it. None of the light-alls worked. There was no moon. There were shadows, but there was nothing to create them. I am just reporting what I have researched here. There's a lot of non-standard material going on this evening for these individuals. Well, they hold their ground, And after a prolonged period of time, 20 minutes or half an hour, Larry and Adrian, and next slide please, Larry and Adrian observe, and I'm sure other men as well, focus a bit, that there is a light that they see on the far side of this thing. And this is a sketch that Larry had done for me in November of 1987, 3 months before we left, trying to give me an idea of what the overview was. He said, I can't really draw the shape. It was like a circle and an arrowhead, and I'm not an artist, but I think he did a great rendition. As you can see, even this basic sketch does not depict a craft shape that we are familiar with from the world of popular fiction. These marks that we see indicated with pencil here, each one pretty much stands for an individual airman standing in cordon around. Larry and Adrian would have been standing right about here. And there were cameras on location. This was not only filmed, it was filmed with video, which was new technology at the time, and you couldn't miss those big bulky cameras. It was filmed with 16mm movie cameras. It was filmed with 35mm film. The Air Force now acknowledges that there was some film shot, but it was all fog and it doesn't exist. Right, and I don't either. Failed light-alls were over here, and the glow that they saw started about here and started to move around this way. Finally, it passed this appendage and came into their line of sight. Now, they are close. They are like 20 feet from this glow. Shock is funny stuff. We've all had the experience, unfortunately, of receiving that profoundly sad phone call that a loved one has just died very suddenly, or we've been in an auto accident, or something has happened to give us that adrenaline dump, an epinephrine dump, tunnel vision, auditory exclusion. Body goes into a very specific series of incidents during shock, and sometimes the way it's manifested is in some kind of intellectual denial. And Larry and Adrian watched very carefully as the glow receded, and they were able to make out 3 distinct shapes within the glow. And as the shapes became clearer, Larry's reaction was essentially, oh my God, what are kids doing out here? This is a military situation. Within 2 or 3 seconds, there was no question in his mind, there were no children on location. There were 3 beings. They were not your stereotypical grays. In fact, they seem a bit more stocky. They were about 4 feet tall each. Arms, legs, torso, enlarged cranial structure, and those huge, dark eyes that we have had described so often over the years. And just to make it a little better, they all seem to be in single-piece fitted garments. They were semi-translucent, and they're floating about a foot off the ground. Every single man is unarmed. Can you imagine what might have happened? Everybody remembers the day the Earth stood still and poor Platoon gets off his saucer and takes out the device to give to the President of the United States and catches one. There is some anecdotal evidence to suggest, and I don't know what to say about it except to just lay it out for you and hope that you read the details in the book, that the Air Force may have had an idea of what they were sending these men into to confront, which in itself is extremely disturbing. Next slide, please. Just a bit of a close-up of the overview of this craft. Next, please. Okay, we're going to jump ahead here, but not... Actually, Randy, can we go back one? I love analog technology, thank you. Okay, the men are standing their ground, and the night is going on. It's now 2 or so in the morning, and Sergeant Ball, the senior master sergeant on location, is moving around the... Oh, take that back. Again, in a case like this, one tries to remember all the details that one can in the appointed amount of time. After the beings appeared, one of the ranking base officers, who we are as sure as we can be, was the wing commander, Gordon Williams, steps through the cordon of men, also unarmed, and stops facing about 10 feet away from these beings. He is a tall guy, 6'2" or so. He cocks his head slightly down. These 3 beings do this. And that was it. part of the mythology, the nonsense, the spin, the goofy, unsubstantiated rumors that surround this case is that overt communication took place here. Handshakes were done, candy bars were exchanged, etc. and so forth. This is patent nonsense. However, let's face it, scientific studies indicate that more than 70% of all human communication is nonverbal. Body language, a gesture, eyes, words are secondary in many cases. And the fact is, a human being looking in the eyes of three non-human beings in a field in England may be constituted some sort of communication. In any case, the standoff continued into the night. And it was not long after this that Master Sergeant Ball began to move around the perimeter and tap every third man and discreetly order them back to the staging area. Again, that's almost half a mile or so, a couple of hundred yards from where this has happened. Larry was in the second to last group to be tapped out, dutifully headed back to where the forest meets the woods, headed back to the logging road, but stopped at that perimeter where the forest met the field, looked back to fix the picture in his mind. Here's the officer, here's the beings, here's the craft, and went back to the vehicle. I can't believe how little time I have left. I really have to apologize. It's just a very difficult case to sum up, but let me move quickly. On the way back to the base, the men started to ask each other what they thought it was. They were admonished absolutely not to discuss this with anyone, even among themselves. They would be debriefed the following day, and indeed they were. However, Larry, being very close to his mom and a very independent guy, the next morning called his mother in upstate New York and began to tell her about this incident. Was cut off on the phone, had Greg Batcher with him, another airman who witnessed this. His mom had a witness at home who spoke with her as well. And he was very quickly called on the carpet, told he had violated this order. At the same time, we know you guys were pretty stressed out last night, so we're not going to throw the book at you, but you've got a choice of dropping a rank or taking a modest fine. He chose the fine, knowing that it would take him years to get his airman first class status back, possibly, and left the service not having fully paid it off. Was contacted some years later by the Air Force Office of Finance about that $96-odd that he owed them, and said, "I'll be happy to send you that check if you just remind me that what that was about." They didn't. Next slide, please. Okay, this is Air Force Form 490. It's a fancy name for an appointment form for a medical appointment. Larry's eyes began to hurt him from shortly after leaving that field and stayed that way. The next day he requested a checkup. The checkup came in early February. You notice right here, the checkup is February 2nd. It is the Lincoln Heath, which is the sister base also, eye and ear clinic. And what is established here is that he has suffered optical, retina burn exposure. That's the only place it could have happened. And the burns were severe enough that he might not have even been able to be gotten into the Air Force had he had those when he had his physical some months earlier. Next slide, please. Larry wrote to his mom. She wrote back. And I'm glad he was a pack rat and saved every darn thing he had, because this is dated March 22nd, 3 days after the so-called, about a week after the so-called halt memo, a description of the events kind of collapsed together, written by the deputy base commander, who was also a witness. And in the letter, we see Larry's mom saying, just a few short weeks after, "Well, enough about that. You certainly explained your situation with the UFO, and as you know, Larry, what was seen by you and others, and by others and yourself, was just that, a UFO. It must have been quite..." Next slide, please. This is an article from the Venerable Times of London explaining that the sightings that had occurred shortly before were probably the result of a meteor shower, and there was a meteor shower that night. And the fact is, had you been standing in Capel Green looking just the right direction, you would have seen it for about 3 seconds. And that was not what these men saw. Nor was it the Orford Lighthouse several miles away. They end this thing in the most perfectly cavalier manner that is often used to dismiss these delusions that we human beings are subject to, and chalk the thing off to the fact that the film Airport 1975 was shown on television on Thursday night, raising public awareness to the possibility of aircraft trouble. So rest easy, America. Next slide, please. The men involved shortly after were spread out all over the world. Some of them permanently, some of them temporarily. Operation Bright Star, which is now an annual exercise that the American military participates in Egypt, had its very first year then. And this is a picture Larry took of Sergeant Adrian Bustinza, again the man who stood next to him in the field that night in the Valley of the Kings outside of Cairo. Next, please. This is Airman Warren on the day of Wing Commander Gordon Williams' change of command ceremony, at which he was Williams' driver and part of his security team. Years ago, Larry gave me that badge that he's wearing there, told me I earned it, I agreed I had. And when I see him again, I'm giving it back. He's got a 2-year-old son now, and that being a dad has been the best thing that's ever happened to him, and that's a boy that should grow up knowing what an amazing guy his dad is. Next slide, please. There's the sucker right there. Next, please. Focus. This is the rough form for Larry's honorable discharge request. What is non-standard about this is the signature, which on the formal version, of course, was signed rather than rubber stamped, is it signed by the Wing Commander Gordon Williams, again, who we maintain is a witness to this incident, and who has been very, very coy about his involvement. He has come forward and he has said publicly that he will neither deny nor confirm his involvement, which is a long way from a denial. What is being said here is the reason for his discharge is breach of contract. He went into the service to be a police officer. Once this event happened, he was identified as a troublemaker for calling his mother, for caught going through records, for asking guys what they thought had happened, and he realized he might be in danger and should probably get out of the Air Force. He sued for an honorable discharge, received it, and a wing commander only deals with flight activities. It should have been signed by the Deputy Base Commander, Lieutenant Colonel Charles I. Hall, also an eyewitness, but it was not. Next, please. This is Larry's honorable discharge. I've had people actually come up to me and say, you know, he wasn't even in the service. Well, you don't get these out of Cracker Jack copies. Now, you'll notice here that there is something covered. I am not trying to repress facts from you. He's just so touchy about my showing his Social Security number. Go figure. Next slide, please. Larry moved back to upstate New York. The economy there absolutely sucked. He ended up washing dishes, living with his mom, starting to experience symptoms of post-traumatic distress disorder from not having made his peace with this incident by a long shot. Did not dislike being in the Air Force, disliked what the Air Force had done and how they had treated him and the other men, including one of his buddies who committed suicide shortly after this, by blowing his brains out on guard after manifesting problems that should have pulled him into counseling, or certainly should never have put a loaded weapon in his hands again. And so Larry went back to his original recruiter in Albany, New York. The guy said, shouldn't be a problem, you have honorable discharge, goes to bring him up on the computer. The computer essentially says, no information available, nothing else follows, do not process. He said, what happened to you in England? Larry said, you wouldn't believe me if I told me. The staff sergeant said, I'm going to continue working on this. Died 6 weeks later in a car accident. I'm not saying it was connected, but he's gone. Ultimately, Larry approached his congressman, who is still the congressman for that district, Jerry Solomon, who petitioned the Air Force to get Larry re-enlisted, received this letter from the Office of the Surgeon General of the Air Force that says, among other things, this is a reply to your letter, authorities in the office advised that Mr. Warren was permanently disqualified by the U.S.A.F. Training Command Surgeon on September 17th. What the heck is that about? He got out of the Air Force on May 15th. And the reason is congenital, partial, ankylosis, radiolinear, joint proximal, bilateral, cannot fully extend right arm. But he cannot fully extend his right arm bilaterally, which means right arm and left arm, and it's congenital, so it's from birth, and he would have never gotten in the Air Force if he couldn't extend his arm. This is bullshit, and this is the kind of crap that they sometimes use to try to throw people off, discourage them from looking into things. And as Larry said, I fully extended my right arm and threw this into the trash. Thank goodness he pulled it out. Next slide. Larry ultimately was connected up with a police officer in Coventry, Connecticut. He was living in Connecticut at the time. And for those of you that are fairly adept students of study of UFOs, you probably know the name Larry Fawcett. He's a police lieutenant, now retired, lives in Florida, but was an active investigator at the time. He introduced Larry to CAUSE, Citizens Against UFO Secrecy, and they took the information Larry gave them about the location, the times, the individuals involved, put it together in a Freedom of Information Act, and that act alone resulted in the release of the most profoundly disturbing and sensational document yet to be associated with this case, a one-page report written by the then Deputy Base Commander, who retired about 12 years later as a full colonel. Next slide, please. That photo of that newspaper headline is the result of the fact that once they received that document, they sent it to a number of researchers in England who had requested it as a courtesy, who turned around and sold it to the News of the World, the largest tabloid in the world, for £15,000, kept the money for themselves, and the story broke. Larry is named in the front page article, as is Colonel Hall, and his document, as is Williams. Within weeks, there were something like 120, 130 articles on the subject in every newspaper in England, and the story had broken. This is Larry back on location for the first time in 8 years and 3 months, reliving the incident for me into the tape recorder, and I must tell you it is a profoundly moving recording. I am at 8 o'clock right now. We have a couple extra minutes to sum up. Thank you. Next slide, please. This is once again the same spot in the field, and it's a close-up, but you don't have to, squint too much to see that it is discolored. I can guarantee you it is not an illusion. Next slide. Picture you just saw was taken in February 1988. This photograph was taken in June of 90, 2 years, 3 or 4 months later. This is the exact same spot. It is now bright green. All the grass around it has gone to hay. The reason, we found out in our soil analysis. Number one, in seed germination tests, plants grew much slower in the affected soil and mutated, so that, this is a perfect example, by the time it had finally become green, the rest of the field had moved along by weeks. Also, there was something like 4 times plus the amount of iron particles, nothing near the case that Eric had reported earlier about the concentration of particles. But what our analyst said was that a source of electromagnetic energy sat on that spot and was powerful enough, visualize how powerful it would have to be to pull those little particles of metallic substance through the soil, packed farm soil, into that area. Most interesting was the fact that there is a certain component of sand in most farm soil, and 6 miles from a major coast, of course, it's going to be fairly pronounced. The sand in the samples was just what they would have expected. The sand that the soil that I drew from the affected area, the sand was no longer sand. Our soil analyst, who works for a very respected laboratory in Massachusetts, described it as in an interim form of glass. It had melted down. Now, when you do this kind of casework, you look to triangulate. We have documentation. We have photographic evidence. We have physical evidence. We have anecdotal evidence of witnesses saying this is the spot. And as they say in Oklahoma sometimes, if it walks like a duck, it talks like a duck, and it tastes like a duck when you cook it, it might be a duck. Next slide, please. One more shot, again, just to show you that I'm not trying to frame this out and that there are lots of other green ellipses in the field. There it is again. 9.5 years after the incident, I should add. Next, please.
and get one more photo in position again to give you a sweep of the field and show you that that's the way it is. Next, please. Handsome devil, yeah? Next one, please. The Rendlesham Forest, a wonderfully evocative and spooky place. I have only just touched upon this story, and primarily around one night, in a book that sweeps across several decades and focuses not on aliens, ETs, are we alone, what planet do they come from, why are they here, but what the forces that be, working groups within our own military community, aspects of our own intelligence community will do to individuals who dare to bring embarrassment to us. Now, again, I've only touched on this. I will be here certainly till tomorrow night. I invite you to ask any questions you want. We don't have a lot of books, but my friend Randy Harrigan has a supply of them, as well as CD-ROMs of the book for you, which I'll be glad to sign or inscribe. Sorry I've run over. I thank you so much for being a good audience, and I hope you'll join me tomorrow morning for the abduction workshop at 9 o'clock.